Two F-35 fighter jets roared overhead at dawn, then reversed course mid-mission. She stood beside her pickup truck, homeless, watching them circle back. 3 months ago, she saved a patient's life by breaking protocol. The hospital fired her for it. It erased her reputation quietly. She believed she had become invisible. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this resonates with you, consider subscribing, because those jets were searching for her. The parking lot stretched empty under a flickering streetlight, concrete stained with oil and cracked from years of neglect. In the corner beneath the orange glow sat a single pickup truck, windows fogged from the inside. Dawn had not yet broken, but the alarm on the phone inside had already begun its quiet, insistent buzz. The woman curled beneath a thin blanket stirred, her breath visible in the cold air. She reached out with practiced speed and silenced the phone before the second ring could finish. There was no grogginess, no moment of confusion. This was routine. Senny Breyer sat up slowly, careful not to bump her head on the roof of the cab. She changed clothes beneath the blanket, moving efficiently in the cramped space. Her movements were mechanical, stripped of thought. A fresh shirt pulled on, hair gathered and twisted into a tight bun. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. The face that stared back looked older than it should have. Dark circles under gray eyes, skin pale from too many nights without real sleep. She looked away. The truck door creaked when she opened it, and the cold air hit her immediately. She stepped out onto the cracked pavement, stretched once, and locked the door behind her. In the bed of the truck lay the small archive of her former life. A duffel bag with clothes, a box labeled personal effects in neat handwriting that was not her own, a folded scrub top with the name tag facing down, hidden from view. She did not look at it. She walked across the empty lot toward the glow of the 24-hour gas station on the opposite corner. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above rows of candy bars and energy drinks. The clerk behind the counter barely glanced up. Senna moved past the aisles toward the back where the restroom was located. The door lock clicked behind her, and she stood in front of the mirror again, this time under harsher light. She washed her face with cold water from the tap, brushed her teeth over the sink, and combed her fingers through her hair before tying it back again. The routine was the same every morning. It had been for 3 months. The restroom door opened while she was drying her hands. Another woman entered, younger, dressed for an early shift somewhere. Their eyes met briefly in the mirror. The woman's gaze flickered away almost immediately, the kind of avoidance people practiced when they sensed discomfort, but did not want to acknowledge it. Senny understood. She had become part of the background, invisible in plain sight. She left the restroom without a word and exited the gas station. On her way out, she passed a newspaper vending machine near the door. The headline on the front page caught her attention. Regional Hospital Faces Scrutiny After Incident Review. Her hand paused on the door handle. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition, pain. But she did not stop. She pushed through the door and walked back toward her truck, the morning air cold against her skin. You don't become invisible all at once. It happens in pieces. First, they stop saying your name. Then they stop seeing you. And eventually, you stop seeing yourself. 3 months earlier, the emergency room at St. Callum Regional Hospital had been a different kind of chaos. The kind that broke people if they were not trained for it. Sirens screamed outside as ambulances arrived in rapid succession, doors slamming open, gurneys wheeling in fast. A mass transit accident on the highway had left dozens injured, some critical, blood on the floor, voices shouting over each other, monitors beeping in overlapping rhythms. Senna had been in the center of it, moving between patients with the kind of precision that came from years of experience. She assessed vitals, called out orders, prioritized triage with split-second decisions. Around her, the team worked in controlled frenzy, but she was calm, focused. A young woman was wheeled in, unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. The paramedics were shouting updates as they transferred her to the hospital gurney. Wren Hastings, 23 years old, blunt force trauma to the chest, suspected pneumothorax. Senna moved to her immediately, hands already checking pupils, palpating the rib cage. The monitors confirmed what she already knew: bilateral pneumothorax, both lungs collapsing. The patient was coding. Senny looked up at the senior doctor across the room. Dr. Garrick Tome, He was directing another team, hands covered in blood, focused on a different patient. She called out to him. "We're losing her." He glanced over, jaw tight. "Protocol says we stabilize the criticals first. Surgical team is coming." Senna looked down at the patient. The monitors were screaming now. Oxygen saturation dropping. "If we wait, she's dead. I can do this." Dr. Tome's face changed, not with concern, with anger. "You do not have clearance for that procedure." She did not wait for approval. Her hands moved with absolute certainty. She called for the equipment she needed, a 14-gauge catheter, saline flush, pressure support. The nurses around her hesitated for only a second before following her lead. Senna performed the emergency decompression with the kind of speed and accuracy that left no room for doubt. The patient's chest rose. The monitors beeped steadily. Oxygen levels began to climb. Dr. Tome stood across the room, staring. His expression was not relief. It was fury. The memory cut off abruptly, snapping back to the present. Senna sat in her, truck now, staring at the folder open on her lap. Termination letter, eviction notice. A printed email chain that she had read so many times. The edges of the paper were soft from handling. The words were clinical, bureaucratic, designed to sound reasonable. Ms. Breyer acted outside scope of training, liability concerns, effective immediately. There was another memory, shorter and sharper. An HR office, pale walls. A woman in a suit sitting across from her with folded hands. Dr. Tome standing near the window with his arms crossed. The woman had spoken in the kind of tone people used when they wanted to sound sympathetic, but were not. "You understand this is about patient safety." Senna had responded quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "The patient lived because of what I did." The woman had not blinked. "The patient lived in spite of your recklessness. We can't have nurses playing doctor." Back in the truck, Senna closed the folder and placed it on the passenger seat. Her hands trembled slightly. She clenched them into fists until they steadied. She pulled out her nursing license from the folder, still valid, still hers, but useless now. No references, no reputation. Just a name tied to a quiet blacklist that no one would admit existed. They didn't fire me publicly. They did it quietly, efficiently. By the time anyone asked, I was already gone. And no one asked. Her phone buzzed on the dashboard, a text message from an unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she locked the phone without opening it and placed it face down. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. Nothing did anymore. The day passed in fragments. Senna drove to the public library and sat at one of the computers near the back. She searched job postings with the kind of methodical focus that came from repetition. Every application asked for references. Every application required contact information for previous employers. She closed the tab after 15 minutes and left. At the community shelter, she volunteered in the kitchen, serving meals to people who looked as worn down as she felt. A woman named Verity Oakes worked beside her, friendly in the way some people were, naturally. She tried to make conversation, asking questions about where Senny was from, what she did before this. Senny deflected politely, kept her answers vague. Verity didn't push. She seemed to understand when someone didn't want to be known. By evening, Senna returned to her truck. She parked in a different lot this time, 3 blocks from where she had started the day. She rotated locations every night. It was safer that way. Less attention. She locked the doors and settled into the driver's seat, pulling the blanket over her legs. You learn to move without being seen, to need less, to expect nothing. It's survival. But it's also disappearing. She noticed the black SUV 3 rows away as the light outside began to fade. It had not been there when she arrived. A figure sat inside, backlit by the glow of a laptop screen. Senny watched for several minutes, her pulse steady, but her attention sharp. The SUV did not move. Neither did the person inside. She considered starting the truck and leaving, but exhaustion won out. She locked the doors again and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders. As she closed her eyes, she heard it. Distant at first. The rhythmic sound of helicopter rotors somewhere in the sky, far away. She didn't react. Military helicopters flew over this part of the city sometimes. Training exercises, routine patrols. The sound grew slightly louder, then faded into the distance. She let it go. Miles away, in a facility most civilians would never see, Major Lydian Cross stood in a military command center. The room was sterile and efficient, all screens and data feeds and voices speaking in clipped professional tones. Lydian stood at a central console, reviewing live updates on a situation that was escalating, faster than anyone had anticipated. A subordinate approached her from the side, tablet in hand. "Ma'am, we have a situation." Lydian did not look up from the screen. "Define situation. Mass casualty scenario. Chemical exposure. Same profile as the transit incident 3 years ago. We need someone who's performed a lateral thoracic decompression in the field." Lydian's hands paused on the console. She turned to face him. "How many people know how to do that?" "In theory, maybe 50 worldwide. In practice, under pressure, with zero equipment." The subordinate hesitated. 3. 2 are overseas, one's a civilian. Lydian's jaw tightened. "One's what?" "Discharged from St. Callum Regional. Flagged in the database for protocol violation." The subordinate pulled up a file on his tablet and turned it toward her. "Liability concern. But she's authorized under emergency protocol override." Lydian stared at the screen. A file photo appeared. Senna Breyer, RN. Under status, the word terminated. Under clearance, the words emergency protocol override, authorized. Lydian read the file twice, her expression unreadable. Why wasn't she protected? No one answered. Lydian straightened, her voice calm but absolute. "Find her." The next morning, Senna woke to the sound of jet engines. It was not unusual. Military aircraft flew over the outskirts of the city regularly. She opened her eyes slowly, the light outside still dim. The sound was distant, routine. She sat up and reached for the water bottle in the cup holder. Then the sound changed. It grew louder, closer. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Senna looked up through the windshield just as 2 shapes tore across the sky. F-35 fighter jets, flying in tight formation at low altitude. The roar was deafening. The truck rattled beneath her. She stared, frozen, as the jets streaked overhead. And then, impossibly, they banked hard. The maneuver was sharp, aggressive. The jets reversed course with precision that left no doubt it was intentional. Senna's breath caught. She stepped out of the truck, eyes locked on the sky. The jets were already gone, but the sound of their engines still echoed in the distance. Her hands gripped the doorframe. I told myself it was coincidence. Military exercises, flight path corrections, anything but what it felt like. She exhaled slowly and forced herself to turn away. But then she heard it. The sound of vehicles. Multiple. Fast. She turned back toward the entrance of the parking lot and saw them. 3 black SUVs moving with the kind of precision that made her stomach drop. They did not slow. They knew exactly where to go. The vehicles surrounded her truck in seconds. Doors opened. Personnel in tactical gear stepped out. Their movements controlled but deliberate. Senna's instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. Her heart pounded in her chest. She stood still, hands visible, waiting. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of her. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was dressed in military uniform, her posture straight and composed. 2 armed personnel flanked her, but their weapons were holstered. The woman walked towards Senna slowly, stopping 10 feet away. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, but not hostile. Senna Breyer. It was not a question. Senna's voice came out guarded, careful. "Who's asking?" "Major Lydian Cross, U.S. Air Force Medical Command. We need you to come with us." Senna's jaw tightened. "I don't work for anyone anymore." Lydian's expression did not change. "We're not asking as an employer. We're asking because lives are at stake, and you're the only person who can help." Senna looked past Lydian at the vehicles, the personnel, the sky where the jets had disappeared. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Lydian met her eyes, and for the first time, something softened in her expression. "Because 3 years ago, you did something no one else could do, and we need you to do it again." The air between them held for a long moment. Senna's hands were shaking now, but she did not move. The question hung in the silence, unanswered. What did she do that no one else could? And why would the military reverse fighter jets to find her? If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever done the right thing and been punished for it, leave a comment below. Your story matters. And if you want to see how this ends, subscribe and stay with us. Part 2 is next. She lost everything for saving a life. Then 2 fighter jets reversed course mid-mission to find her. The military surrounded her truck. They said lives were at stake. They said she was the only one who could help. But why? The convoy moved fast through the city. 3 black SUVs in tight formation. Senna sat in the back of the lead vehicle, flanked by 2 personnel in tactical gear. They did not speak to her. Their eyes remained forward, professional and alert. Across from her sat Major Lydian Cross, a tablet resting on her lap. The screen glowed faintly in the dim. Interior. Lydian had not looked at Senna since they left the parking lot. She was reading something, her expression focused and unreadable. Senna's hands rested on her knees. They were still shaking, but she forced them to be still. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them making sense. She had been erased, blacklisted. Her name was attached to liability concerns and protocol violations. No hospital would touch her. No agency would hire her. And yet, the military had sent fighter jets, had reversed a mission, had come looking for her specifically. The convoy turned sharply, and Senna felt the acceleration as they merged onto a highway. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Lydian finally looked up from the tablet. Her eyes met Senna's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lydian leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but direct. 3 years ago, you performed a field thoracic decompression on a patient during the Riverton transit incident. Senna's jaw tightened. She did not answer immediately. The memory was sharp, clear. The emergency room, the chaos, Wren Hastings coding on the table, Dr. Tome's fury. She looked at Lydian and spoke quietly. They fired me for that. Lydian's expression did not change. I know, but the patient you saved, Wren Hastings, is alive because of you. And her case file was flagged in our database as a critical reference for emergency trauma protocols. Senna stared. You tracked me down because of a file. Lydian turned the tablet around and placed it on the seat between them. The screen displayed a document Senna had never seen before. It was not from St. Callum Regional. It was not from any hospital. The header read, FEMA Emergency Response Database. Below it, her name, Zenny Breyer, RN. And beneath that, a series of entries documenting the incident 3 years ago in precise clinical detail. The patient's condition, the intervention performed, the outcome. And at the bottom, a classification label. Critical civilian, asset. Senna read the screen twice. Her breath caught in her throat. They documented it. Lydian nodded. Of course they did. Just because your hospital didn't value you doesn't mean you weren't essential. The words hit harder than Senna expected. She looked away, out the window. The convoy was slowing now, approaching a secured checkpoint. Military personnel in uniform waved them through without hesitation. The facility beyond the gate was massive, steel and concrete rising against the early morning sky. Senna realized they were no longer in the city. She did not know where they were. Lydian continued, her voice steady. That same scenario is happening right now. Chemical exposure, multiple casualties, respiratory collapse. No one at the scene knows how to stabilize them without surgical intervention. Senna turned back to her, the weight of the words settling in. I'm not licensed anymore. Lydian met her eyes without flinching. This isn't about licenses, it's about capability. You've done this. You know how. And right now, you're the only option we have. The convoy stopped. Doors opened. Lydian stood and gestured for Senna to follow. She stepped out into cold air and harsh daylight. The facility loomed around them, sterile and imposing. Personnel moved with purpose across the grounds, voices clipped over radios. Lydian walked ahead, and Senna followed, her legs unsteady but moving. They entered through a side door into a corridor lit by fluorescent lights. The walls were blank, unmarked. Lydian walked quickly, and Senna kept pace. They passed rooms with closed doors, equipment being wheeled down hallways, personnel in medical scrubs moving fast. The sound of monitors beeping echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Lydian stopped outside a set of double doors. She turned to Senna, her expression serious. You ready? Senna did not answer. She could hear the chaos beyond the doors, voices shouting, alarms blaring. The familiar sound of emergency medicine in full crisis. Her body responded before her mind did. Her breathing steadied. Her hands stopped shaking. She looked at Lydian and nodded once. The doors opened. The trauma center was controlled chaos. Patients on gurneys lined the walls, some hooked to ventilators, others receiving oxygen through masks. Medical personnel moved between them, calling out vitals, checking IVs, adjusting equipment. The air smelled of antiseptic and blood. Monitors beeped in overlapping rhythms, some steady, others screaming warnings. Senna stepped inside and felt the shift immediately. This was familiar. This was where she belonged. A senior medic looked up as Lydian and Senna entered. He was older, graying at the temples, his scrub stained with sweat and blood. His expression was confused, irritated. "Who's this?" Lydian's voice cut through the noise. "She's in command." The medic stared. "Excuse me?" Lydian did not repeat herself. She stepped aside, and Senna moved forward. The room went quiet for a beat. Every set of eyes turned toward her. She did not hesitate. She walked directly to the nearest critical patient, a man in his 30s, unconscious, his chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular breaths. She placed her fingers on his neck, checking pulse, looked at the monitors, checked his pupils with a penlight someone handed her without being asked. Bilateral pneumothorax, progressing. "We have maybe 4 minutes before he codes." The medic approached, his voice cautious. "We're waiting on the surgical team." Senna did not look at him. "We don't have time." She turned to the nearest nurse. "I need a 14-gauge catheter, saline flush, and someone who can hold pressure." The nurse hesitated for only a second, then moved. Senna pulled on gloves, her movements automatic. The medic watched, uncertain, but did not stop her. She positioned herself beside the patient, located the insertion point with practiced precision. Her hands were steady. The room held its breath. She inserted the catheter with a motion so smooth it looked effortless. The patient's chest expanded. The monitor beeped once, twice, then settled into a steady rhythm. Oxygen saturation began to climb. Senna pulled back, removed the gloves, and moved to the next patient without a word. The medic stood frozen, staring at the stabilized patient. Around him, the other personnel exchanged glances. Someone had just walked in off the street and performed a procedure most of them had only read about in textbooks, and she had done it in under 2 minutes. Senna was already at the next gurney, a woman in her 40s, breathing labored, skin pale. Senna assessed her in seconds. Same presentation, collapsed lung. She called out orders with absolute authority. The nurses responded immediately this time, handing her equipment, positioning themselves where she directed. Senna worked with the kind of focus that eliminated everything else. There was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation, only the patient, only the procedure, only survival. The woman stabilized. Senna moved to the next. The cascade began, one patient after another. Each time, Senna identified the issue, directed the response, and performed the intervention with precision that left no question about her capability. The room transformed around her. Personnel who had been uncertain now moved with coordinated efficiency. They followed her lead without question. She did not ask for permission. She commanded, and they responded. A younger nurse approached her between patients, handing her water. "You've done this before." Senna took the water, drank, and handed it back. "Many times." The nurse hesitated, then asked quietly, "Where did you train?" Senna did not answer. She moved to the next patient. The trauma center had shifted. What had been chaos was now controlled urgency. Senna had established a rhythm, and the entire team moved within it. She prioritized patients, delegated tasks, corrected mistakes before they became critical. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her presence alone commanded respect. Across the room, Lydian stood near the observation window, arms crossed, watching. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture was tense. She had gambled on this, reversed a military operation, pulled a civilian nurse out of homelessness, and placed her in command of a federal medical crisis. And it was working. The doors to the trauma center opened again. A senior military doctor entered, dressed in full surgical gear. He was older, decorated, his uniform marked with insignia that indicated rank and authority. He had been briefed on the situation and had arrived expecting to take command. He stepped into the room and stopped. The scene before him was not what he expected. Patients stabilized, personnel working in coordinated precision, And at the center of it, a woman he did not recognize, moving between gurneys with the kind of authority that came from absolute competence. He watched for a long moment, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. The medic who had questioned Senna earlier approached the doctor. "Sir, she's already stabilized 12 patients, the ones we thought wouldn't make it." The doctor looked at the medic, then back at Senna. He did not interrupt. He did not take over. He quietly stepped back and observed. Senna finished with another patient and turned to assess the room. Her eyes swept over the remaining cases, categorizing severity, prioritizing response. She noticed the senior doctor standing near the door. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement. Then he turned and left the room. The medic who had questioned her at the beginning approached slowly. He stood beside her as she checked a patient's vitals. His voice was quieter now, respectful. "Where did you train?" Senna glanced at him, then back at the monitor. "St. Callum Regional." "Before they decided I was a liability." The medic paused. The words hung in the air between them. He looked at her, then at the room full of stabilized patients. His voice was barely above a whisper. They were wrong. Senna did not respond. She did not need to. The truth was visible in every patient still breathing, in every monitor beeping steadily, in every life saved because she had done what no one else could. The operation continued for another hour. By the time the last patient was stabilized, Sini's scrubs were stained with sweat and blood. Her hands ached. Her body was exhausted. But every patient in the room was alive. Every critical case had been addressed. The surgical team arrived late, assessed the situation, and found nothing left to do. The work had already been done. Senna stepped outside the trauma center into a hallway that was quieter, cooler. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her breath came in slow, measured pulls. She had not allowed herself to feel anything inside that room. But now, outside of it, the weight crashed down. Not regret, not doubt, just exhaustion. Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes. Lydian stood a few feet away, holding a bottle of water. She handed it to Senna without a word. Senna took it, drank half in one pull, and let her head rest back against the wall. Lydian spoke quietly. "You saved 14 lives today." Senna stared at the ceiling. "I did the same thing 3 years ago. They called it reckless." Lydian's voice was firm. "Because they were afraid. Hospitals protect institutions. We protect people. That's the difference." Senna looked at her. "What happens now?" Lydian reached into her jacket and pulled out a folder. She opened it and handed the contents to Senna. Official documents, federal seals, emergency response commendation, medical asset recognition, federal clearance reinstatement, Sen's name on every page, her actions documented, protected, validated. Lydian continued. "This goes into every database, FEMA, DOD, Homeland Security. Your name, your record, your actions, documented and protected. No hospital can erase you now." Senna stared at the papers in her hands. Her vision blurred slightly, but she did not cry. She just held them, feeling the weight of what they meant. She had been erased once, quietly, efficiently, and now she was being written back into existence, not by the people who destroyed her, but by the ones who needed her. Lydian pulled out a tablet and turned the screen towards Senna. Flight logs, military records, timestamp, 0547 hours. Mission abort authorization. Emergency civilian asset retrieval, and at the bottom, a name. Breyer S. Lydian's voice was steady. "Those F-35s this morning. Mission critical air patrol. They were ordered to abort and reverse course at 547 hours. Senna looked at the screen, her breath catching. They turned around for me. Lydian met her eyes. "Command doesn't reverse fighter jets for just anyone. You were that essential." The words settled into silence. Senna stared at the flight log, at her name printed in official documentation, at the proof that she had not been invisible. She had been essential, so essential that the military had turned around a mission, had sent personnel, had found her in a parking lot and brought her here because lives depended on it. Lydian stood. The system failed you, but the people who needed you didn't. Remember that. She walked away, leaving Senna alone in the hallway. Senna looked down at the papers in her hands again, at her name. at the proof that she mattered, that she had always mattered. Inside the trauma center, the monitors continued their steady rhythm. 14 patients breathing, 14 lives saved. And in the hallway, a woman who had been erased held the documents that proved she had never truly disappeared. She had just been waiting to be found. If someone ever made you feel like you didn't matter, like your skills were worthless, share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and if you want to see what happens when the truth finally comes full circle, subscribe. And join us for part 3. This story isn't over yet. She went from sleeping in a truck to commanding a military medical operation. She saved 14 lives in a single day. The hospital that destroyed her reputation now wanted her back. But the military was hiding something. The question wasn't whether she was capable. It was why they came looking for her at all, and what they knew that she didn't. The operation had wound down slowly, like a storm finally exhausting itself after hours of violence. The trauma center that had been filled with alarms and urgent voices now hummed with the quieter sounds of post-crisis care. Medical teams moved between patients with measured efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, documenting outcomes in careful detail. The air still smelled of antiseptic and blood, sterile and metallic, but the urgency had been replaced with something steadier: relief, the weight of survival. Senny sat outside on a concrete bench near the facility's side entrance, still wearing the borrowed scrubs they had given her hours ago. They were stained with sweat and streaked with dried blood that was not hers. The fabric clung to her skin, damp and uncomfortable, but she had not thought to change, had not thought about anything beyond the next patient, the next procedure, the next heartbeat that needed to be sustained. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers laced together loosely. They were no longer shaking. The adrenaline had burned through her system hours ago, leaving behind only exhaustion, deep, bone-level exhaustion that made her limbs feel heavy, and her thoughts moved slowly, as if through water. She stared at the concrete beneath her feet. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, filled with dirt and small weeds that had pushed through despite the harshness of their environment. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ground, and Sene watched them shift incrementally as time passed. She had not slept in over 30 hours, had not eaten anything substantial in longer than that. But she was not hungry, she was not anything, just empty in a way that felt different from the emptiness she had carried for 3 months. That emptiness had been hollow, a void where purpose used to exist. This emptiness felt clean, earned, the kind that came after pouring everything out until nothing remained. The door behind her opened with a metallic click. Footsteps approached, measured and calm, the sound of boots on concrete. Senna did not turn around. She knew who it was before the woman spoke. Major Lydian Cross sat down beside her on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. She held 2 bottles of water, condensation beating on the plastic. She set one down next to Senna without a word, the bottle settling against the concrete with a soft sound. Senna picked it up after a moment, her movements slow and deliberate. She opened it and drank, the cold water shocking against her throat. They sat in silence for a long time. Around them, the facility continued its operations with practiced efficiency. Personnel moved between buildings, their footsteps echoing across the open spaces. Vehicles came and went through the secure gates, engines rumbling low. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled with indistinct voices. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that 14 people were alive because of what had happened inside those walls. Lydian spoke first, her voice quiet but clear. "You saved 14 lives today." Senna did not respond immediately. She drank more water, then set the bottle down beside her with care. Her voice, when it came, was flat, tired, stripped of inflection. "I did the same thing 3 years ago. They called it reckless." Lydian turned slightly to look at her, her expression thoughtful. "Because they were afraid. Hospitals protect institutions first. We protect people. That's the difference." Senna's jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands. They were clean now. Someone had given her sanitizer while she was working, the sharp smell of alcohol cutting through everything else. But she could still feel the phantom sensation of gloves, of catheters sliding into place, of skin beneath her fingers. Muscle memory that would never leave, written into her body at a level deeper than the conscious thought. What happens now? Lydian reached into her jacket and pulled out a folder. It was thin, official-looking, with a federal seal embossed on the cover in dark blue. She opened it carefully, as if the contents were fragile, and handed them to Senna. 3 documents, each one printed on heavy paper with multiple signatures at the bottom. Sena took them, her hand steady despite the weight of what she was holding. Despite understanding instinctively that these papers represented something irreversible. The first document was titled Emergency Response Commendation. It detailed the events of the day in clinical, precise language that somehow made the chaos feel manageable in retrospect. Mass casualty scenario, chemical exposure incident, emergency field intervention performed by civilian asset Senny Breyer, RN. 14 lives stabilized. 0 fatalities. At the bottom, signatures from officials whose names Senny did not recognize, but whose titles carried weight that was impossible to ignore. FEMA Director, Homeland Security, Department of Defense. Each signature was different, individual, proof that real people had read this and decided she mattered. The second document was labeled Medical Asset Recognition. It was shorter, more direct, the language stripped to its essential meaning. In recognition of exceptional skill and capability demonstrated under extreme circumstances. Authorization for federal emergency response protocols. Clearance level upgraded to priority civilian asset. Her name typed at the top in bold letters. Her actions validated in black ink that would not fade. The third document was the one that made her breath catch, the one that changed everything. Federal Clearance Reinstatement. All previous disciplinary actions related to St. Callum Regional Hospital incident are hereby superseded by federal authorization. Personnel record amended to reflect federal commendation and emergency response capability. Effective immediately. No appeals process required, no conditions attached. Senna read all 3 documents twice, her eyes moving over every word, every line, every signature. Her vision blurred slightly at the edges, but she did not cry. She had not cried in 3 months, had taught herself not to. But she felt something break loose inside her chest, something that had been held too tightly for too long. She just held the papers, feeling the texture of them beneath her fingers. Real, official, permanent. Proof that she existed in a way that could not be erased. Lydian's voice was steady beside her, grounding. This goes into every database. FEMA, DoD, Homeland Security, CDC, every agency that deals with emergency medical response. Your name, your record, your actions, documented and protected. No hospital can erase you now. Senny's voice came out barely above a whisper. They erased me once. Lydian nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of it. I know, but they don't have that power anymore. This supersedes everything they did, everything they said about you. The federal government has documented that you are an essential asset. That's not something a hospital administrator can undo with a termination letter. Senna stared at the papers. She thought about the HR office, the pale walls and the uncomfortable chairs, the woman in the suit with her folded hands and her sympathetic voice that had held no real sympathy. Dr. Tomey, standing by the window with his arms crossed, his face a mask of controlled anger, the termination letter printed on hospital letterhead, the eviction notice that had followed 2 weeks later, the quiet, efficient way they had removed her from existence, as if she had never mattered at all. And now, 3 months later, the federal government was writing her back in. Not because she had asked, not because she had fought, but because she was capable, because she was essential, because when it mattered most, she had been the only option. Lydian was not finished. She pulled out a tablet from her other pocket and turned it on, the screen glowing bright in the afternoon light. The screen lit up with a document Senny had never seen before. Military flight logs, timestamp data, mission parameters. Technical language that meant nothing to most civilians, but everything to the people who understood how power actually moved. Lydian scrolled to a specific entry and turned the screen towards Senna, her movements deliberate. The log was dated that morning, 05:47 hours. Mission designation Alpha 73. Standard Air Patrol, classified route. Status, active. 2 F-35 aircraft. Estimated duration, 4 hours. And then, at 05:49 hours, a single line entry that changed everything. Mission abort authorized. Emergency civilian asset retrieval. Priority Alpha. All units divert immediately. No exceptions. Below that, another line. Asset identification, Breyer, S. Location confirmed. Retrieval team dispatched. ETA 12 minutes. Senny stared at the screen, her mind moving slowly through the information, processing it piece by piece. Those F-35s this morning. Lydian nodded, her expression serious. Mission critical air patrol. 2 aircraft, classified route. Scheduled duration, 4 hours. They were ordered to abort and reverse course at 0547 hours. 2 minutes after we confirmed your location. Senny's hands tightened on the tablet, her knuckles white. They turned around for me. Lydian's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. Command doesn't reverse fighter jets for just anyone. They don't abort classified missions on a whim. You were that essential. So essential that every other priority became secondary. So essential that 2 multi-million-dollar aircraft changed course mid-flight because you were the only person who could do what needed to be done. The words settled into the space between them, heavy with meaning. Senny looked at the flight log again, at her name printed in official military records, at the proof that she had not been invisible, that she had never been invisible. The system had tried to erase her, had succeeded for a while, had made her disappear so completely she had started to believe it herself. But somewhere in a database she had never known existed, her name had been flagged, her actions documented, her capability recognized. And when the crisis came, when lives were at stake, when time was measured in minutes, the military had known exactly who to find, had known exactly where to look, had known exactly how essential she was. Lydian took the tablet back and stood, her movements smooth and practiced. She looked down at Senna, her expression serious but not unkind. There was respect there, recognition of what Senna had endured. The system failed you, but the people who needed you didn't. Remember that. She walked back toward the building, her footsteps steady and sure, leaving Senna alone with the documents and the weight of what they represented. Senna remained on the bench, the 3 pieces of paper still in her hands. She looked at them again, at her name, at the signatures, at the proof that she mattered, that she had always mattered, even when the world had tried to convince her otherwise. Around her, the facility continued its rhythm, personnel moving between buildings, vehicles passing through gates, radio chatter floating on the air, the world indifferent and constant, uncaring about individual struggles or small victories. But inside Zena, something had shifted, not healed. Healing would take time, would require more than documents and official recognition, but shifted, fundamentally changed. She was no longer the woman sleeping in a truck, convinced she had disappeared from the world. She was the woman who had saved 14 lives, the woman the military had turned around fighter jets to find, the woman who was so essential that national security priorities had been rearranged to bring her in. She folded the documents carefully, treating them with the reverence they deserved, and placed them in the pocket of her scrubs. Then she stood, her body protesting the movement, muscles stiff and joints aching. She walked back inside the facility, through doors that had become familiar in the space of a single day. Days passed in a blur of unfamiliar comfort. The military had arranged temporary housing for her, while she completed the required medical debriefings and documentation. A small room in a facility hotel, nothing elaborate or luxurious, but it had a bed, a real bed with clean sheets and pillows that did not smell like the interior of a truck. Senna had slept for 16 hours straight the first night, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion once it felt safe enough to do so. She woke only when sunlight streamed through the window and disoriented her completely, the brightness alien after months of waking in darkness. She had not slept in a real bed in 3 months, had not woken to sunlight instead of alarms and cold, had not felt the weight of blankets that were meant for comfort rather than survival. The adjustment was strange, almost uncomfortable. Her body did not know how to trust it yet. On the 3rd day, she found herself sitting in a quiet diner on the edge of the city. It was the kind of place that had existed for decades without changing, serving breakfast all day and coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, cracked vinyl booths, laminated menus, waitresses who called everyone sweetheart or hon and knew the regulars by name and order. Senny sat in a corner booth near the window, a cup of coffee in front of her, staring out at nothing in particular, just watching the world move. Past, cars at stoplights, people on sidewalks, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing as it always had. Her phone sat on the table beside the coffee cup. She had been ignoring it for days, letting it charge but not engaging with it. Messages from numbers she did not recognize, voicemails she had not listened to, notifications that piled up unread. But today, sitting in this anonymous diner with weak afternoon light filtering through dusty windows, she picked it up and unlocked the screen. 7 missed calls, 12 unread messages. She scrolled through them slowly, her expression neutral. Most were from reporters. Somehow, word had gotten out about the emergency response operation. Not the details, those were still classified, but enough. Nurse saves multiple lives in federal medical crisis. Local woman plays key role in classified emergency response. Media outlets wanted interviews, wanted her story, wanted her to explain what had happened in language that would translate to headlines and sound bites. She deleted those messages without reading past the first line, her finger moving across the screen with finality. But there was one voicemail that made her pause. The number was familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. She stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the play button. Then she pressed it and lifted the phone to her ear. The voice that came through the speaker was measured, professional, carefully modulated to sound reasonable. Ms. Breyer, this is Dr. Garrick Tome from St. Callum Regional Hospital. We've received correspondence from several federal agencies regarding your case. There have been some developments that we believe warrant a conversation. We'd like to discuss your potential reinstatement and revisit the circumstances of your departure. I understand there may have been some miscommunication during that process. Please call my office at your earliest convenience to schedule a meeting. We're looking forward to speaking with you. The voicemail ended with a click. Zena sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear. She played it again, listening to the careful phrasing. The deliberate word, choices, potential reinstatement. Revisit the circumstances, miscommunication. They were not apologizing, they were not admitting fault. They were not acknowledging that they had destroyed her life over a procedure that had saved a patient. They were offering to undo what they had done, but only because federal agencies had forced their hand. Only because it was now politically inconvenient to have terminated someone the government had labeled essential. Senny pressed delete. The voicemail disappeared from her phone. She set it down on the table and picked up her coffee. It had gone cold while she listened, but she drank it anyway, the bitter taste grounding. The door to the diner opened with a jingle of bells, and Verity Oakes walked in. She was dressed in jeans and a worn jacket, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She spotted Senny immediately and smiled, the expression genuine and warm. She walked over without hesitation, sliding into the booth across from Senna as if they had planned this meeting. Mind if I join you? Senna gestured to the seat with a slight movement of her hand. Verity was already settled, already flagging down a waitress. You already did. Verity grinned, unrepentant. Fair point. She ordered coffee and a slice of pie, then turned her full attention back to Senna. Her expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious, but still open. Heard you've been busy. Senna raised an eyebrow, her tone neutral. Where did you hear that? Verity shrugged, stirring sugar into her coffee when it arrived. Shelter gossip. You know how it is? People talk. Someone said you saved a bunch of people, that the military came looking for you specifically. Her voice dropped slightly, more serious now, genuinely curious. Is that true? Senna considered the question. She could deflect, could avoid the topic entirely, could maintain the walls she had built over 3 months of isolation. But Verity had been kind to her when she had no reason to be, had tried to make conversation when Zenny was invisible to everyone else, had treated her like a person rather than a problem or a liability. So, she answered honestly, her voice quiet. Something like that. Verity leaned back against the booth, shaking her head slowly in what looked like amazement. That's incredible. She paused, then asked carefully, What did they need you for? Senna looked out the window again, watching a family walk past on the sidewalk. A mother, a father, 2 children. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that 14 people were alive today because of a procedure performed in a classified facility. They needed someone who knew how to do something most people can't. Verity studied her for a moment, her expression thoughtful. And you just happened to be that person. Senny turned back to her, meeting her eyes directly. I've always been that person. They just forgot. The words hung in the air between them. Verity's expression softened with understanding. She did not push for more details, did not ask questions that Senny clearly did not want to answer. She just nodded and took a bite of her pie, letting the conversation shift to easier topics. The shelter, the weather, small, ordinary things that felt grounding after days of extraordinary circumstances. When Verity finally left, promising to see her at the shelter soon, Senna remained in the booth. She ordered another coffee and sat alone, watching people come and go through the diner, watching them order food and talk to each other and live their lives without knowing how fragile it all was, how quickly everything could change. She thought about the voicemail, about Dr. Tome's voice, about the careful, calculated offer to undo the damage they had caused. She thought about what it would feel like to walk back into that hospital, to see the people who had erased her, to accept their reinstatement on their terms, as if the past 3 months had been a simple misunderstanding rather than a systematic destruction of her career and reputation. And she realized, sitting in that diner with weak coffee and afternoon light, that she did not want it, did not need it. The validation she had been searching for, the recognition she thought she needed to feel whole again, had come from somewhere else entirely, from people who understood capability over politics, from a system that valued skill over liability concerns, from fighter jets reversing course because she was essential, from Lydian handing her documents that proved her worth in a way no hospital administrator ever could. St. Callum Regional Hospital could keep their apologies and their reinstatement offers. She was done being erased, and more importantly, she was done needing their approval. A week after the operation, Senna stood in front of a small apartment building on the quieter side of the city. The building was old but well-maintained, 3 stories with exterior stairs and a small courtyard in the center where someone had planted flowers that were still blooming despite the season. She held a single box in her arms, cardboard worn soft at the corners. Inside were the contents of her truck, her duffel bag with clothes that smelled like cheap laundry detergent from gas station bathrooms, the folded scrub top with the name tag she had never thrown away, her nursing license, the documents from Lydian. Everything she owned fit into one box, 3 months of homelessness condensed into 12 inches of cardboard. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, her footsteps echoing on the metal. She stopped in front of Unit 2C. The key was already in her pocket, given to her by a housing coordinator who had explained the lease terms with efficiency and little warmth. The military had arranged this too. Temporary housing, they called it, but it was hers for as long as she needed. 6 months guaranteed, longer if necessary. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, the hinges quiet and well-oiled. The apartment was small but functional. 1 bedroom with a window that faced east. A kitchen with a table and 2 chairs, appliances that looked newer than anything she had used in years. A living room with a couch and a window that looked out over the courtyard where the flowers grew. It was not much. It would never be featured in magazines or admired by visitors, but it was hers. A space where she did not have to hide, where she did not have to wake before dawn and move locations to avoid suspicion, where she could exist without constantly calculating her next move. Senna set the box down on the couch and walked through the space slowly, taking it in with careful attention. Clean walls painted an inoffensive beige, functional appliances that worked when she tested them. A bed in the bedroom with sheets already on it, the mattress firm and new, a bathroom with a shower that had good water pressure, a place where she could be a person again, rather than a problem to be managed or ignored. She returned to the living room and opened the box. One by one, she pulled out her belongings and placed them around the apartment with deliberate care. Clothes in the bedroom closet, hanging on cheap wire hangers. Toiletries in the bathroom, arranged on the counter. The scrub top folded carefully and placed in a drawer, where she would not have to look at it every day but would know where it was if she needed the reminder. She paused when she reached the documents, the commendation, the recognition, the reinstatement. She set them on the kitchen table and stared at them for a long time, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. These were proof, evidence that she mattered, that she had always mattered, even when the system tried to convince her otherwise. Her nursing license came out last, She held it in her hands, the plastic card still valid, still bearing her name and photograph from 4 years ago, when she had been younger and more optimistic about what nursing would mean. For 3 months, this card had been useless, a symbol of a career destroyed, a life dismantled. But now it meant something different. It meant capability. It meant essential. It meant she had never stopped being a nurse, even when the system said otherwise, even when she slept in her truck and washed up in gas station bathrooms and convinced herself she had disappeared. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She set the license down on the table next to the documents and walked to the door, opening it slowly. Lydian Cross stood in the hallway, dressed in civilian clothes this time, jeans that looked worn and comfortable, a jacket that was practical rather than stylish. She looked different without the uniform, less imposing, more human, more like someone Sene could imagine having a conversation with, outside of military protocol, settling in. Sene stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter with a slight movement of her hand. Lydian walked in and glanced around the apartment, her gaze taking in the details, with the practiced assessment of someone trained to observe. She nodded in approval. "It's a good space." Sene closed the door behind her. "It's more than I expected." Lydian turned to face her, her expression serious but warm. "You earned it." She reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope, white and official looking. "This is for you." Sene took the envelope and opened it carefully, her movements precise. Inside was a single document folded in thirds. She pulled it out and unfolded it. Official letterhead at the top. FEMA Emergency Response Division. Below that, a job offer written in formal language that somehow still managed to convey respect. Contract position. Emergency medical consultant. Responsibilities included training personnel on advanced field procedures, developing protocols for mass casualty scenarios, consulting on emergency response planning, salary listed, substantial, and fair, benefits outlined in detail, start date flexible, contingent on completion of required certifications and background checks. Sene read the document twice, her eyes moving over every line. "You want me to train others?" Lydian nodded, her expression earnest. "We want to make sure what you know doesn't disappear, that your experience gets passed on, that the next time something like this happens, there are more people who can respond, more people who can do what you did." Sene looked up from the document, meeting Lydian's eyes. "Why me?" Lydian's expression was serious, her voice firm with conviction. "Because you've done this under the worst possible conditions. Because you saved lives when no one else could. Because you improvised a solution under pressure that most people would never think of. Because you're the best person for this job." She paused, then added, more quietly, "And because you deserve to know that what you can do matters, that it's valuable, that it's worth protecting." Sene folded the document carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I'll think about it." Lydian smiled slightly, the expression genuine. "Take your time." "But Sene," she paused, choosing her words with care, "you were never invisible. They just weren't looking." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and recognition. Sene felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she could not quite name. But she did not look away. Lydian reached out and placed a hand briefly on Sene's shoulder, a gesture of respect and solidarity, then turned and walked to the door. She paused before leaving, her hand on the doorknob. "Whatever you decide, you have people who believe in you now. Don't forget that." The door closed quietly behind her, the sound final but not harsh. Sene stood in the center of her apartment, the envelope in her hands, and let herself breathe. Deep, full breaths that filled her lungs completely. For the first time in 3 months, she felt something close to hope. Not the naive hope of someone who believed everything would be easy, but the cautious, hard-won hope of someone who had survived and was beginning to believe they might do more than just survive. That evening, Sene sat on the concrete steps outside her apartment building. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The air was cool but not cold, comfortable in a way that felt almost foreign after months of sleeping in a truck where temperature was always either too hot or too cold. She held a cup of tea in her hands, steam rising from the surface, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. It was chamomile, something she had bought at a small store near the apartment just because she could. Just because having tea felt like a luxury, she was allowed again. In the distance, she heard the sound of jet engines, faint at first, then growing louder as they approached. She looked up and saw contrails streaking across the sky, white lines against the fading light. Two aircraft flying in formation, their paths straight and sure and purposeful. She watched them until they disappeared beyond the horizon, the sound fading gradually into silence. She thought about the parking lot, about waking up in her truck with frost on the windows and her breath visible in the cold, about the moment the jets had reversed course, the sound of their engines shaking the air around her, about the look on Lydian's face when she said, "Command doesn't reverse fighter jets for just anyone," about the 14 patients whose lives had been saved because she had been found, because she had been essential enough to justify reversing a military operation. They said I didn't belong, that I was reckless, that I was a liability that could not be tolerated in a professional medical environment. But when it mattered, when lives were on the line and seconds counted, they turned fighter jets around to find me. Not because I asked for recognition, not because I demanded validation or insisted on my worth, but because I was the only one who could do what needed to be done. Because my capability mattered more than their liability concerns. Because essential is what you can do, not what people say about you. I didn't become visible again because I fought for it. I became visible because I never stopped being essential, even when I believed I had disappeared. The system doesn't always see you. The institutions don't always recognize what matters. But that doesn't mean you're not worth finding. It just means they weren't looking in the right places. Senna closed her eyes and let the evening air wash over her. She thought about the job offer, about training others, about making sure her knowledge did not disappear with her, about being part of something larger than herself, something that valued capability and skill and the ability to save lives under impossible circumstances. She did not know yet if she would accept, but she knew she had a choice now, and that was more than she had 3 months ago when she woke up in a parking lot, convinced she had become invisible. She opened her eyes and looked at the sky again. The contrails were fading now, dissolving into the atmosphere as if they had never existed. But they had been there. Real. Visible. Proof that something had passed through, had left its mark, had mattered even if only temporarily. Just like her. Inside her apartment, the documents sat on the kitchen table where she had left them. The commendation, the recognition, the job offer, her nursing license beside them, the plastic card reflecting the overhead light. Symbols of a life rebuilt from nothing, not the life she had before, not the life the hospital had taken from her with their termination letter and their quiet blacklist, but a new life, one where her capability mattered more than politics, where her actions spoke louder than liability concerns, where she was essential not because someone said so, but because she had proven it under the worst possible circumstances. Senna stood and walked back inside, the evening air following her for a moment before the door closed. She set the tea down on the kitchen counter and picked up the job offer. Read it one more time, her eyes moving over the words with careful attention. Training, protocols, consultation. A way to make sure what she knew would not disappear. A way to ensure that the next time this happened, more people would be able to respond. More lives would be saved. She pulled out her phone and found the number Lydian had given her. Typed a message slowly, each letter deliberate. "I'm in. When do I start?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before the old doubts could creep back in. The message delivered with a quiet sound. Read receipt appeared almost immediately. Typing indicator showed that Lydian was responding. The response came through seconds later. "Next Monday. Welcome to the team." Senny set the phone down on the counter and looked around her apartment, at the space that was hers, at the future that was waiting, at the life she was building from the ashes of the one that had been taken from her. She had been erased once, quietly, efficiently, by people who valued institutions over individuals, who chose liability protection over patient care, who made her disappear so completely she had started to believe it herself. But she had been found again. By people who understood that capability mattered, that experience mattered, that some knowledge was too valuable to lose. That essential was a quality you earned through action, not a label you received through politics. The hospital had called her reckless, the military had called her essential, and in the end, that was the only validation that mattered, the only recognition worth having. The only proof that she had never truly disappeared, even when she believed she had. She walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard. The flowers were still blooming in the fading light, small and persistent. She thought about those flowers, growing in a space that was not designed for them, thriving despite the concrete and the exhaust and the indifference of the city around them, essential in their own way, visible to anyone who cared to look, just like her. The screen faded to black, the apartment window disappearing into darkness. Then text appeared, white and stark against the void. Senna Breyer's actions were documented by federal agencies and used to develop new emergency medical protocols that have since been adopted by hospitals across the country. St. Callum Regional Hospital declined to comment on the termination or the subsequent federal recognition. The patient she saved, Wren Hastings, is alive today. She has since become an emergency medical technician, inspired by the nurse who saved her life. Senna Breyer continues to train emergency responders across the country, ensuring that the knowledge she fought to preserve is passed on to the next generation. Her truck was donated to a shelter that helps homeless healthcare workers get back on their feet. The screen faded to black again. Then, in quiet white text that felt like a whisper rather than a proclamation, a final message appeared. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone who did the right thing and paid for it alone, watching their life dismantle while institutions protected themselves. Someone who was essential, even when the world forgot, even when they forgot themselves. Their story matters. Their capability matters. Their worth was never determined by the people who tried to erase them. Share their story in the comments below. Let them know they were seen. Let them know they mattered. And if this story reminded you that capability matters more than politics, that skill matters more than systems, that people who do the right thing deserve to be seen and valued and protected, then subscribe. There are more stories like Senna's, stories of people who were written off, dismissed, erased by institutions that should have protected them, and then found again, recognized again, valued again, because they were too essential to lose, because essential is what you can do when everything else has been taken away. Thank you for watching. And remember, you're never as invisible as the system wants you to believe. Somewhere, someone is looking for exactly what you can do. Somewhere, you matter more than you know.